Hi everyone, this is Bruce Jens, your instructor for Philosophy 3790, African Philosophy, and I just would like to do a bit of a course introduction and a syllabus run through in this little video. You're going to be getting a lot of videos through this course, and so this is basically the first of all of those. So I've been working in African philosophy for a long time. If you watched my instructor intro video, you'll get a bit more on some of that history. There are a lot of choices to be made when teaching a course like this. African philosophy is a big area, even if it's not something that most philosophers in the West have paid all that much attention to. It's not I guess you would call it a regional philosophy or a niche philosophy, and I'm going to talk more about that in other videos. It really does cover the entire range of philosophical activity. There are African philosophers interested in metaphysics, in epistemology, ethics, politics, aesthetics, and certainly many of them interested in questions around colonization and decolonization. And a lot of other stuff as well. So what that means is that if I'm going to teach a course like this, I'm going to have to make some choices. We cannot cover the entire waterfront, as it were. So my goal here has been to try and expose you to as much as possible in African philosophy, to focus on African philosophy from an African point of view, as opposed to what we might call an intercultural point of view. In other words, I don't want to start from a Western point of view and ask, how do we make sense out of this as an activity? What I want to do instead is to think about African philosophy as it's done by Africans on the continent of Africa as much as possible. I don't want to present a kind of apology for African philosophy, and I mean that in a kind of classic sense of apology, which is a kind of defense or a rationalization for it. What I want to do is to start from the assumption that it is a legitimate way of thinking about philosophy, which it is, which I'm very much convinced that it is. And I want to just start from that position and then just start looking at the ways in which Africans have thought about their experience of their place and of their world, and then go from there to think about how does that make a contribution to other ways of doing philosophy. But that's really the kind of secondary question for us here. The primary question is, how do Africans make sense out of their world? We're going to deal with a lot of the kind of inbuilt assumptions in that very statement. Africa is a very large place. It's the second largest continent in the world. It's the most diverse ethnic, biological, linguistic place in the world. There are about 7,500 languages listed in the world right now, and a good third of them are on the continent of Africa. So, that very diversity starts raising questions about how we unite, that African philosophy together as anything that has commonalities across all of that diversity. So we're going to deal with all those questions, right? But for the moment, we're going to take it as a given that there is such a thing as African philosophy, and that we're going to look at it from an African point of view as much as possible. I am going to deal with the fact that I am not African, and I've brought that up already in the instructor intro video, and we'll be addressing my own place, my own positionality within all of this, and hopefully at the same time bringing up your place and your positionality. I'm very convinced that we ask questions from our places, from the place from which we come. That's not a limiting notion, but that does place us in the world. That means that we have access to certain kinds of assumptions, certain kinds of concepts in certain forms. And the more we can be aware of that place from which we come, the better able we are to go beyond that, to reach beyond that, to dialogue with others, and all of those sorts of things. So there's going to be a lot going on within this course that's specifically and directly about Africa, but that hopefully gives us some tools to think about difference in general and to think about how we move beyond our own kinds of assumptions and our own givens from where we stand. So that's kind of a starting point, but what I want to do here a little bit is to talk through the syllabus. I'm sure the kind of practicalities of the course are very much of interest to people, so let's go over to that. You can see here, if you've taken one of my courses before, and I know a number of you have, some of this will look familiar from a kind of schematic point of view. If you've taken my African Humanities course before, you will be familiar with certain ways of thinking about the continent of Africa. But let's just kind of go through this in a kind of basic level. This is an asynchronous course, which means that there are no specific time periods where we will have all the class together on, let's say, a Zoom call or something like that. I do, however, reserve the right to put up a Zoom call that would be totally optional to people, or a Zoom session in which we can talk through issues within the course. If there's kind of a demand for that, or if people are interested in that, we can certainly do that as well. But that would be, there would be nothing from that would be required for, let's say, a final exam or something like that. As far as required texts go, the main required text is the Coetzee and Rowe text, which is the African Philosophy Reader. Here, it has to be the second edition. The first edition and second edition are very different from each other, and so you will need the second edition. Please make sure that you have that. We're going to be doing a lot of reading from that text. Another source that we're going to have for the course is going to be actually a podcast. And this is the first time I've done that, to actually include a podcast as being a central part of a course. This is a very unusual podcast. It's the general podcast called History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps. This is a really, I think, a fabulous project overall. As you can see here, they have a lot of episodes from a lot of different kinds of areas: classical Greek, late antiquity, the Islamic world. So there's a lot of stuff in there. They've done medieval philosophy, Byzantine, Renaissance, and the one that's of interest to us is the Africana philosophy subsection. As you can see here, it's co-written by Chika Jeffers, who we're actually going to be interviewing in a week or two for this course. And so he and Peter Adamson, who is the main force behind this, scripted these. And there are, let's see if we can scroll down here. Oh, there's just a further reading here. Well, if you click on each of these here, what you'll find is that there are already many episodes in the can, probably over 90 episodes already. This is an ongoing production. They're still in the process of doing episodes for this third section here, the Africana Philosophy in the 20th Century section. So you can see they started episode 68, and we go all the way down here to the bottom, where we have episode 91, which dropped on the 9th of January, which is actually today, which is the day that I'm recording this syllabus overview. And so I'm going to be assigning you podcasts. They're usually less than half an hour long each. Extremely clear and good kinds of histories of many of the kinds of things that we're going to be talking about in this course. As you can see, it uses the term Africana. This is a course in African philosophy. Africana is usually meant to be an umbrella term that includes not only what happens in philosophy on the continent of Africa, but also among the diaspora. African diaspora, which is, of course, African American, African Caribbean, Africans in Europe, in the UK, in England, and in France, and other places as well. And so it's a broader kind of sweep than we're going to be taking within this course. We do actually in the department also have an African American philosophy course, which I believe was taught last year. And so there are other kinds of entries into this broader term of Africana. So our kind of slice of this is going to focus very much on the continent of Africa itself and what happens there. So there are a lot of episodes within this that are relevant to that. And as I say, I'm going to be assigning those within within this overall process. And in fact, there's going to be, if we want to kind of segue into the assignments, there's going to be an assignment based on what I've called the HOPWAG. So that's History of Philosophy Without Any Gaps. So the short term is HOPWAG. And so what I'm going to be asking you to do is to choose one of those. It need not be one that we talk about or assign in class, but I'm going to want you to kind of go further than the episode itself does. I want you to do a little bit of background research on a figure or on a concept that they discuss in that, and write me something fairly brief to kind of show that you have kind of gone a step further than they're able to go within the episode itself. And so this is an attempt to kind of get you into the weeds, as it were, of African philosophy, historically and in contemporary sense. As I say, they're still dropping episodes each week, each Sunday a new one comes out, and so there may well be more that are relevant to our course as we go. But in the syllabus, I've already, I'm going to have listed a number of episodes that I want you to listen to. So as I say, we've kind of segued now into the course requirements, so let me pick those up. Let me go back up to the top on that. The class format is worth mentioning. It's a series of modules that open up. Each one opens on the Wednesday of the week, and it goes to the next Tuesday evening. So the only one that is out of that pattern is the very first one, which is the one we're in right now, and that opens on the Monday, of course, because the whole course opens on the Monday, and that's just really a 2-day module to kind of introduce you to the course itself. So because of that, the only reading for that first module is the syllabus itself. Please read the whole thing. Please read, including what I have at the end called the fine print, which we'll look at in a moment. So those modules open up, and so as part of those modules, there's a discussion and participation. There's a discussion for each week, and I'm asking you to make comments. Within those discussions, there will be readings for the weeks. There will be a topic for the week. I'll have some discussion prompts there as well. What I'm asking for you to do is to contribute at least 2 posts for the discussions, and the first one of those I would like to have up by the Friday evening. So if modules open on the Wednesday morning, the first one needs to be up on the Friday evening, and then the second, and you can do more than 2, obviously. But whatever else you do needs to be up by the end of the module, which is the next Tuesday evening. So why do I do it that way? Well, it's very difficult to respond to a discussion if everyone posts at the last minute. And so this is my attempt to get at least enough content in there that people can actually engage it. So if we have everyone doing at least one thing by the Friday evening, that means you will have to read by that point, and respond and kind of have an initial engagement with the module. I'm also trying to make it so that people don't just leave the whole thing to the very end, and then just kind of rush something in. That's not a good way of engaging the material either. So this is an attempt to kind of get you to deal with this on a regular basis and engage the module at least a couple of times while it's open. Material like this really needs kind of a regular engagement, and I know everyone's lives are busy, but trying to kind of make that a habit, I think is worth doing. You will notice here, by the way, that there's also what I'm calling a mandatory financial aid quiz. That's a quiz that does not add to your grade in any way, but I'm sure you do this in every course. Some sort of grade is needed during the first week of class, so that financial aid folks know that you are actually in the course. And so I'll be putting something like that up. Please do that as soon as possible, just so we have a record that you are actually in the class. And as I say, that doesn't affect your final grade. So the discussions and participation, that's 20% of the final grade. I've already mentioned this analysis of a figure or concept that comes up in a HOPWAG episode. That'll be 15% and due on the February 22nd. There is then, let me jump forward here and look at the final paper, which is due right at the end of the term. This, I've given you a kind of upper word limit, and this is pretty typical for me. You know, I give people upper word limits and not lower word limits, and you might be saying to yourself, ah, great, you know, I can get away with as little as possible. Well, no, actually you can't. You know, what I'm looking for is the lower word limit is a quality paper. So I'm looking for you to kind of think through what a good question would be and how you're actually going to answer that. So there's an upper word limit for that paper, and so there's a paper at the end of the term, and if we go back, there's a prospectus and bibliography due for that. That's due a month before the final paper. And so I'm having you hand that in with a kind of idea of what you want to do, and that's so that, you know, really my goal is to get the best work out of you that I can. And the way that I know to do that is to give you a few kicks at the can, as it were, to a few ways to kind of think through your ideas in advance, allow me to respond to them, you know, go back and forth. There can be more of a response than just the, or more of an interchange than just the prospectus if you want. You know, I can give you some ideas and you can come back and say, well, how about this question? I really focus on the idea of having a central question that you're writing on. So I will be looking at the prospectus to see if you can identify a question that's relevant, that's related to the kind of material that we have in the course. There will be a lot of reading in this course. I mean, it's a philosophy course. There's no way around that. And it's probably, I would guess, an area that is not particularly familiar to a lot of people that are taking this course. It's an intro course. So I need to get a bunch of things in front of you in order for you to be able to think through the kinds of issues that people on the continent of Africa are thinking through. So those two things are linked together, the prospectus and bibliography on the one hand and the final paper. The idea is that you'll give me you know, a paper that is not just a kind of last minute sort of idea that you have, but hopefully something that you can kind of give some considered thought to and do some background reading and all of those sorts of things. I mean, really just the kind of thing we hope for in a philosophy course. Then finally, there's a final exam in the final exam period. It will be a comprehensive exam over the entire course. It will be obviously a take-home exam. In something like this, there's really no way around that. I have not got the format of that exam together yet, so I don't yet know if there will be a part of it that will be kind of short answer in a kind of quiz format. But the bulk of the grade will likely be short essay kinds of answers, and you'll have some time to do those. In other words, I'll give you so short essays in advance, and then you'll have time to write them and upload them. So that's the idea that I have for how to handle the exam. So as you can see here, there's a schedule for the course. I've got it laid out, and it's also within the you know, if you kind of log into the course itself in web courses, you're going to see something like this given as well. There are going to be links within that to all of the kinds of work that I'm asking you to do that's not part of the you know, African Philosophy Reader. Otherwise, there's a thing called APR that stands for African Philosophy Reader, and page numbers. So you'll see a lot of things that are given in that format here. So that kind of lays itself out if you look at the topics. Really what I want to do is to start off thinking about the course in terms of what it means to think about philosophy, as I call it, as if the world exists. In other words, as if we live in places in the world and you know, our thinking happens within a world, not simply in a kind of Platonic ideal space or an abstraction or something like that. And so if we can start thinking about philosophy as if there is a world in which we are engaging, then we can start thinking about it in terms of an African world, a world in which you know, in which over 1 billion people live on the continent of Africa and engage the world thoughtfully, think about their world in order to live in it in all sorts of different ways, you know, practically and you know, abstractly and all sorts of other ways. So you can see we're going to start off with that. You know, some of these questions are you know, very seemingly basic, and they're going to turn out to be anything but. So what is African philosophy? Where is Africa? Who is African? If you've taken my African Humanities course, you will see that there are echoes of those questions from that course, but we're going to be taking a different angle on those kinds of questions in our course here. We're going to look at African philosophy and method, like what does it mean to engage in the knowledge that's on the continent of Africa. We're going to take head on what I'm calling the existential threat in African philosophy, which is colonialism, slavery, and apartheid. These three phenomena, which have been imposed upon Africa in many cases by non-Africans, by whites especially, but and others as well. We need to take that on from a kind of philosophical point of view. What does that mean for the doing of philosophy on the continent of Africa? Questions around epistemology, what counts as knowledge. We're going to look at, questions of ethics, both in general and in terms of gender and sexuality. We're going to look at questions around politics, African philosophy and the future of social structures, art, and finally what I'm calling non-representational philosophy. So in other words, how do we think about doing African philosophy without thinking that our task is to represent African thought on the continent in some kind of veridical manner. And so obviously we want to do that sometimes, but is that the sum total of what it means to do African philosophy? And I'm going to make an argument for the idea that there's more going on than simply the representation of how Africans on the continent think about Africa. So that's the kind of overall path or the pattern that we're dealing with. As you can see in the syllabus here, after that I've got what's called a fine but important print. And you can get a lot of information there about the overall structure of the course, everything from standards for the papers themselves, the electronic submissions of papers, which I have on there from really times past, from face-to-face courses. It becomes much more straightforward in a online course. I have notes on writing help here. Notes on attendances and absences, and obviously again that means something somewhat different in a web course. We don't have physical meeting times within classes in a course like this, so we will but if you simply aren't engaging the course for a significant amount of time, I would very much ask you to kind of reach out to me and see if we can work through all of this together so that you can engage the course. My goal is not only to get the best work out of everyone that I can, but also get you through the course itself. So there's a lot here. There's a thing on classroom behavior. Again, we're not in a classroom, but as you well know, the kind of things that people say to each other in online environments can approximate a kind of classroom situation and can be, very good or very problematic. And so my goal is to make our online exchanges into positive, constructive ones. So therefore I will not have tolerance for, racism, sexism. I will not have tolerance for the kinds of things where people need to demonstrate their worth in order to be able to make the case of defend who they are first, so that before they actually can engage in an argument itself. And so you just please read through that on flexibility and late papers, talking about digital tools here, communication of grades. That's really a moot point at this point because communicating through web courses is no problem. General communication with students. I do have a UCF email, which you can email me at, but really the best way to reach out to me is through web courses itself. And so please do that if you have questions. Talk about incompletes, academic integrity, that is plagiarism and so forth. Short answer, please don't do that. All of that. Course accessibility, financial aid, and campus safety statements. And these are really kind of boilerplate sorts of statements given by the university, many of them having to do with COVID and So there's a whole section here on COVID-19 as well. Please take a look at that. I do have a statement here on controversial content as well. I do not generally give things like trigger warnings. I am sensitive to the very varying experience that people have had on all sorts of kinds of issues, especially in a course like this around racism and sexism for that matter, and other kinds of things. We do need to take on the kind of history of those phenomena of marginalization, really brutalization in many cases. And those are felt not just as individuals, but as whole groups of people, whole classes of people, whole races, and so forth. And that's going to be part of the content of doing an African philosophy course. We can't not talk about those phenomena, especially when we're talking about the history of colonialism, apartheid, slavery, and all of those sorts of things. The intention is never to re-victimize people in any of those kind of situations. The intention is always to educate people, to show what the world really is like and has been like, and think about how a future might be different from that. So I am willing to work with people if there are particular kinds of things that are sensitive, but I do have a reading list on the course, which I believe, is a good reading list for the kinds of things that are talked about by people on the continent of Africa. And so I sometimes people have asked, well, can I just not read a certain thing? I mean, it's a sensitive issue for me or something like that. And, I am much more interested in working through why it's a sensitive issue for somebody and getting them to a place where they can think about the real conceptual issues at stake, as well as the, emotional and personal issues at stake. So my goal is to not be a therapist in any of this, but my goal is to deal with the reality of the area that we call African philosophy. So all of that to say, I don't give warnings of that sort, but for example, I have in some pieces, in one piece in particular, edited out the N-word that is used in a kind of piece from the 1950s, and it's used by Frantz Fanon. You can find it there in the piece that we downloaded, and Frantz Fanon famously is one of the most anti-racist, anti-colonialist figures that we could be looking at, and he uses those words in order to think about how blacks have been marginalized and how blacks have been essentially attacked and what the response ought to be. But I've taken those words out, and we can talk about why I particularly have taken those words out. It's not to sugarcoat history or anything like that, but it gets back to the questions around positionality of who is talking about these sorts of things. And so, that's an example of controversial content where I'm trying to tread lightly, but at the same time, deal with the world as it is, and the world as, the arguments that are being given for particular kinds of positions. So, so that's kind of all that I really have to say, I think, about the syllabus, in the course and how the course is going to be conducted. I'm more than happy to hear from any of you if you have questions about any of this. And especially if you find that there are kind of incongruities in the course, and that I say one thing in one place about, let's say, a due date, and it shows up differently in a different place or something like that, please let me know about that, because, I try not to make mistakes like that, but they do slip through sometimes. And so I will certainly fix that kind of thing when I find out about it. So anyway, thank you so much. I am very much looking forward to this course. I love teaching this stuff and working in it in general. And so we will go forward from there. Thanks a lot.